welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at Camptosaurus. It's a plant-eating dinosaur, an ornithischian.
Yep, late Jurassic. From Western North America mostly, but maybe Europe too.
And the name Camptosaurus, what does that tell us?
Well, it's Greek. Means flexible lizard.
Flexible lizard. Why flexible?
It refers to the sacral vertebrae. Scientists initially thought they had, unusual flexibility.
Oh, flexible lizard. Got it. So where did this all start, the discovery?
It goes back to 1879, Wyoming, a discovery by William Harlow Reed.
And the famous O.C. Marsh got involved.
He did. He named it Camptonotus at first, thinking flexible back, along the same lines.
Camptonotus. And the main fossil, the sort of reference point.
That's the holotype, YPM 1877. It's a partial skeleton. Gave us that first glimpse of its basic build.
But as often happens, things weren't quite that simple, right? That first name didn't last.
No, it didn't. Turns out Camptonotus. Well, it was already the name of a type of cricket.
A cricket? Seriously?
Yep. So Marsh himself had to rename it in 1885.
To Camptosaurus.
Yeah.
A paleontological correction.
Exactly. And back in 79, Marsh also named two species right away.
Okay.
C. dispar, based on fossils from Quarry 13 in Wyoming.
Right.
And C. amplus, which he based on a foot bone from a different spot.
But this is where it gets a bit messy, isn't it? That C. amplus foot.
Oh, yeah. That foot bone, the one used to define C. amplus, was later figured out to belong to something else entirely.
Something else like
the predator Allosaurus.
wow. So a herbivore species based on a carnivore's foot.
Hey, yeah. A bit of a mix-up. But understandable maybe, given how much was being discovered so quickly back then. They were literally piecing things together.
So those initial classifications were really just a starting point.
Definitely. And that starting point needed quite a bit of tidying up over the years.
You mentioned C. dispar became the main species. Did Marsh name others besides dispar and the mistaken amplus?
Oh, yes. The late 1800s were buzzing with discoveries. Marsh added C. medius and C. nanus in 1894.
And it didn't stop there.
Nope. Charles W. Gilmore came along later, in 1909, and added C. brownie and C. depressus. So the list was growing.
Seemed like quite a family of Camptosaurus species for a while, but that picture changed.
It did, significantly. Fast forward to 1980, Peter Galton and H.P. Powell took a really close look at all these species.
And what did they find?
They basically concluded that C. nanus, C. medius, and C. brownie probably weren't distinct species after all.
Oh, so what were they then?
Their thinking was these could represent younger individuals, maybe juveniles, or even differences between males and females within the main species, C. dispar.
So variation within a single species, not separate types.
Exactly. So they synonymized them, folded them into C. dispar, really streamlined the picture. It shows how our view of variation evolves.
That makes a lot of sense. Size and shape can change a lot as an animal grows. Now, there was also some confusion about a skull.
Yes, you're probably thinking of YPM 1887. It's a skull. Marsh first assigned it to C. amplus.
The one based on the Allosaurus foot. Oh, dear.
Yeah. And Gilmore agreed, using that skull, YPM 1887, for his descriptions and reconstructions of the Camptosaurus head. It was kind of the reference skull for a while.
It wasn't Camptosaurus.
Correct. Much later, in 2007, Brill and Carpenter looked at it again. New techniques, fresh perspectives.
Hey.
And they realized it was something completely different. A new genus and species entirely. They named it Theophytelia cari.
Wow. So the main skull used to describe Camptosaurus wasn't even Camptosaurus. That really shows how important it is to keep re-examining old finds.
Absolutely. Science is always refining itself. Okay, so that's the North American picture, more or less. But what about Europe?
Right, because some European fossils were also called Camptosaurus at one point, weren't they?
They were indeed, for quite a while. Names like C. inci, C. hoggi, C. leedsi, C. prestwichi, C. valdensis, they were all lumped under Camptosaurus.
Made it seem like it had a really wide range.
Exactly. But as we learned more about ornithopod evolution, that picture started to unravel.
How so? What happened to those European species?
Well, take C. inci from Romania. It's now thought to be a rhabdodontid, a totally different group. And the fossils are pretty scrappy, so it's often called a nomen dubium, a doubtful name.
Okay, so Incii out. What about the others? C. valdensis.
From England. Now considered an iguanodontian, so closer to things like iguanodon itself, more advanced than Camptosaurus.
And C. leedsi, also England.
Yep. That one's now recognized as its own thing, a Dryasaurin-related but distinct. It got its own genus name, Calovosaurus.
Okay, so Calovosaurus. What about C. hoggy?
Sea hoggy also got its own genus, Owenodon. It had actually been called Iguanodon hoggy even before being briefly put in Camptosaurus. Now it's Owenodon.
Lots of renaming.
Yeah.
And C. Preswitchi. You said that one had a complicated history.
Yeah, Preswitchi had a bit of a journey. Also English. Originally Iguanodon preswitchi, then got its own genus Cymnoria, then got sunk into Camptosaurus.
Back and forth.
And then more recently, researchers decided Cymnoria was valid after all. And importantly, Cymnoria is now seen as a Styracosternan.
Styracosternan.
Yeah, that's a group closer to the advanced iguanodonts and hadrosaurs. So quite a bit further along the evolutionary branch than Camptosaurus dispar.
It's really like detective work, sorting all this out over decades. But does this mean Camptosaurus or its very close relatives were definitely not in Europe?
Well, for a long time it looked that way. But then, quite recently, in 2022.
Oh, a new discovery.
Yeah, fossils from Spain, some vertebrae, part of an arm bone. They've been tentatively assigned as Alhol, Camptosaurus.
Meaning affiliated with Camptosaurus.
Exactly. They seem closer to the North American Camptosaurus than to other European ornithopods from that time, like Draconex.
So maybe a close cousin did make it across?
It's looking possible. It really keeps things interesting, doesn't it? We're still figuring out their distribution.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Okay, let's shift gears to the animal itself. What did Camptosaurus actually look like, physically?
It was fairly robustly built, not delicate, strong hind legs, definitely, and its feet were quite broad.
Any standout features on the feet?
One thing is it still had 4 toes on its hind feet. Some later relatives reduced that number, but Camptosaurus kept 4 functional toes.
Interesting. And size-wise? Big, small, average?
Generally, think around 5 to 6 meters long. That's, what, 16 to 20 feet?
Okay, decent size.
And weight estimates are usually between, say, 500 and 1,000 kilograms. So 1,100 to 2,200 pounds, roughly. A medium-sized herbivore.
But maybe some got bigger?
Yeah, there are some larger fragments that hint at adults potentially reaching almost 7 meters, maybe 22 feet or so. Although, interestingly, the ones from Quarry 13 seem to be a bit smaller on average.
And the head. We know the early picture was skewed by that Theophytelia skull.
Right. The actual Camptosaurus skull was more triangular.
Okay.
And it had a more pointed snout than those early incorrect reconstructions showed. Plus, a beak at the front.
A beak for snipping glands.
Precisely. Very useful for a herbivore.
And inside the mouth, the teeth. What were they like?
They were packed tightly together, forming like a continuous cutting or grinding surface.
Okay.
Individual teeth had these thick ridges down the middle on the outer side and sort of serrated edges, like tiny saw blades. You see similar things in Drysaurus, but they're more developed, more prominent in Camptosaurus.
And did they use them a lot? Is there wear?
Oh, yes. Often quite extensive wear on the teeth. That strongly suggests it was eating pretty tough, fibrous vegetation that needed a lot of processing.
So a robust plant eater, well-equipped for its meals. Now, where does it fit in the grand scheme of things? Its family tree.
Well, Marsh originally gave it its own family, Camptosauridae. Simple enough.
But that changed.
Later, some thought it was maybe an early iguanodontid, but now with modern phylogenetic analysis...
Which uses computers to compare lots of features.
Exactly. The current consensus places Camptosaurus as a basal member of a really important group called Ankylopalexia.
Ankylopalexia. Okay, what does basal member mean in this context?
Basal means it's near the base or the beginning of that group. So Ankylopalexia is this major branch of ornithopods, and Camptosaurus is positioned close to the common ancestor that eventually gave rise to all the later iguanodontids and the incredibly successful hadrosaurids, the duck-billed dinosaurs.
So it's kind of a key stepping stone.
A really crucial spot, yeah. It helps us understand how those later, more specialized herbivores evolved.
How does that compare to other plant eaters living alongside it back then?
Good question. Contemporaries like Drysaurus, or maybe Drinker, Ophnalosaurus, they're generally considered more basal than Camptosaurus.
Meaning they branched off earlier?
Exactly. They're on earlier twigs of the ornithopod family tree before you get to the branch leading to Ankylopalexia.
Okay, so Camptosaurus is on a path leading towards the more advanced forms.
That's the idea. Cladistic studies, like those from 2010-2011, place it clearly within Ankylopalexia. But interestingly, it sits outside another subgroup called Styracosterna.
Styracosterna.
Think of Ankylopalexia as a big branch. Styracosterna is a smaller branch coming off it, containing things like Eutodon, Hippodraco, even Theophytelia, that mistaken skull.
Ah, it fits in there.
Yep. And eventually leading to Iguanocolossus and the hadrosauriforms. So Camptosaurus is on the main Ankylopalexia branch just before the Styracosterna split off.
That paints a clear picture of its evolutionary neighborhood. What about its lifestyle? Any clues from the fossils about how it lived?
Well, based on studies of related dinosaurs, some researchers estimate it could potentially run up to, say, 25 kilometers per hour, about 15 miles per hour.
Decent speed for a hefty plant eater. Good for escaping predators, presumably.
Likely, yeah. A necessary skill in the Jurassic?
Anything else? Life history. Babies.
There's one really fascinating find, a tiny fossilized embryo, only about 9 inches long.